Hey everybody, still working here in Sunland. Just rolling out some cabinet faces here. And thinking about why it is that the socialists among us are convinced that economics is a zero-sum game, when I know that it's not. I was listening on the radio yesterday, I heard interviewed briefly the new city council person in Seattle, and she is an open and unabashed socialist. She's from India and believes that we have a greater disparity of wealth in our country than they do in India, which is a bit of a stretch, I would imagine, but that's what she thinks. And she was talking about, now I believe she referred to the average CEO. It was a radio thing that went by quick, and that she says makes $6 million a year, which she then says is hundreds of times more than their lowest paid worker. So I got to thinking about that a little bit, and I realized, okay, well, maybe that's true. I don't think that that's the average CEO. There's a hell of a lot of CEOs that are making, 100 grand, 75 grand, 300 grand. I don't see that as average. Perhaps it's the average of the, Fortune 500 companies or whatever. So fine, let's just imagine that that's true. Well, let's just take for a second the idea that the lowest paid employee is making, say, $15 an hour. That's the figure that's being bandied about a lot lately in terms of the discussion about minimum wage. So maybe that's true. So let's talk about the guy that is always held up as the sort of good capitalist, and that would be James Senegal, the guy that runs Costco. Now, he makes, and I know this is true because I looked it up, he makes $2.5 million a year, all right? And he does have employees that make $15 an hour. They keep saying that. That's his sort of entry-level guys make that kind of money. And so it seems fair to look at that and say, okay, if he's the good capitalist, he is making, at that price, he's making 50 times what his employees make on an hourly basis. 50 times. All right? So, fine. It's okay for him to make 50, but a guy that makes $6 million a year then is going to be slightly less than 3 times what Senegal is making. So he's going to make somewhere a little bit less than 150 times what his employees are getting paid. Well, that's not exactly hundreds, but it's a lot of money, Ray. I get it. It's a lot of money. And something in me has always responded to the idea that there should be some ratio between top and bottom. But who imposes that? And who gets to decide? What about Bill Gates? Bill Gates was in lots of trouble with the left in the 2000s, or what my son has called the pre-teens. He was in lots of trouble with them. He was considered to be building a monopoly and using coercive business practices by bundling all of his stuff with the computers who he had licensed to use his Windows operating system. All right? They didn't like him. He was a bad guy. Well, he just turned around and started giving money to the Democrats. And suddenly he's a really great guy. And he always comes out when this discussion comes up. He and his buddy Warren Buffett, who make fabulous, huge, amazing sums of money, they always come out and go, we're not paying enough in taxes, Well, so we ought to raise it all. Now that we've got billions, you guys ought to raise it for all the guys who make $200,000. They ought to be making more. It's not fair. Well, okay. If that's the idea, let's just tease that out a little bit. How does a guy at the top making less money help me? How does that really help me? How does that put money in my pocket? I just was in Studio City today looking at a couple of jobs. I got a really nice couple of referrals there from some work I did over there, and we have a neighborhood referral service, and I got a great letter in there, and I got a couple of calls from guys who are in the business, so to speak. I think they're in the films business, both of them. And it's that kind of neighborhood. And these guys have a boat bad news for me. They're going to spend some money with me, and because I know they got a lot more, I realize I can charge them more for my services. And, you know, I'm working in a working class neighborhood right here, which is fine for me. I don't have any problem working for people who make the kind of money I make. But I can't charge the guy that I'm working for here nearly as much as I could for the other guys. He's not rich. Well, wouldn't it be better for me if he was? Wouldn't I be able to get more of that money out of his hands and then back into, you know, paying for things? Wouldn't I be able to buy some things? But regardless of that, these guys are not keeping their money in their mattresses. It is going back into investment. You know, a guy like Warren Buffett doesn't mention that he has exactly the same kind of company, Berkshire Partners. Berkshire Hathaway is his investment firm, but he has a private equity firm called Berkshire Partners that is exactly the kind of thing that Romney was called a vulture capitalist for having. And what those guys do is they raise some money from people, mostly from pension funds. Most of the money comes out of pension funds as an investment. And they go into a distressed company and they invest in it. They said, well, you loaded it up with debt. Yeah, that's called investing. You go in there and you buy new machinery. That's called loading up the company with debt when you're a lefty. You know, and they clean out the pension funds. Well, these are run by pension funds. It's the investors in the pension fund that bet that money with a guy like Romney or a guy like Warren Buffett at Berkshire Partners. And when it works, you got a Staples. You got something that is a big employer. When it doesn't, the company goes under. It was going to go under anyway. And then the pension fund loses its money. That's what's called cleaning up the pension funds. So, you know, I mean, come on. But when it works, it's good for everybody. And if it didn't work, that company's going down anyway because it hasn't been managed properly. A losing company is not put in distress by a guy with billions of dollars or millions in the case of Romney. Romney has a fraction of the kind of money that a guy like Steven Spielberg has. But if those guys then go take some of their millions and invest it into something that's going to maybe create jobs, how on earth are they the enemy? I don't get it, particularly when they themselves are paying nearly the entire tax burden. They're paying for the public schools that they don't use. Their kids don't go to public schools. They're paying for the public parks that their kids don't play in. They can afford their own parks. They're not using things like public transportation, these trains that are never profitable that everybody has to pay for through tax dollars. It's the rich guys that are paying that. Now, how are they hurting us? I don't get it. Why is this the problem? I think it's because when we learn math as children, we sit a kid down, put 3 blocks in front of Bobby, and we put 3 blocks in front of Bobby and 3 blocks in front of Betty, and they sit there and we go, okay, good, you've each got 3 blocks. This is fair. But what if I take the 3 blocks from Betty and put them over on Bobby's? Now Bobby has 6 blocks and Betty only has 0. And this is by way of teaching them addition and subtraction. But right at that moment, Betty goes, well, that's not right. And she becomes a Democrat. And that's as far as her math ever goes when it comes to the getting and the receiving, the getting and the giving. There's no sense that wealth can be created. It's not as if we have the same amount of dollars that have been sitting in Fort Knox since the Civil War, and we're just fighting over possession of that same number of dollars. For God's sake, there's billions and billions and trillions of dollars that are printed to respond to new wealth creation. I'm no economist, but I can at least figure that out. I'm only the world's smartest house painter. But anyway, that's just what I'm thinking about today. And now I'm going to go play music.